And it turns out Canadians are, in fact, comfort
baking. And as they're baking, they're going to need
discovering new recipes, trying to make sourdough.
Starter is a mixture of flour and water, and it is the life force of sourdough or naturally leavened
bread. Just cooking in general. If there's one good thing about the coronavirus, it's more people have time to cook, or more people are home and they can dedicate time to making food from scratch. And there's no food you can make more from scratch than bread.
Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we'll be learning how to create sourdough starter and how to make your first bread with little to no equipment. Making sourdough bread is a great way to take your mind off of everything horrible in the world, like COVID-19, whether or not you'll be able to see your grandparents again, the murder bees, the anxiety that murderers, I mean cops, give you, and climate change. To create your starter, you're going to need a container with a lid, any type of flour, and room temperature filtered water. On the first day, all you need to do is combine equal parts flour and water in your container, stir, put the lid on it, and leave it for 12 hours. I started my sourdough starter at 9 p.m., so I would feed it at 9 a.m. the next day, and then again at 9 p.m. For the second feeding, you want to use equal parts starter, water, and flour. I try to use roughly 100 grams of each, or 1/4 of a cup. The discard from the sourdough starter can be used for various recipes. It's a good idea to look into food you'd be interested in making with the discard, likely sourdough pancakes, or crackers, dog treats, and many other things. When you combine the ingredients, make sure you remove the extra starter, then pour in the water and stir. The water will help loosen and break apart the starter. This will make it easier to combine the flour. Feed your starter for at least 7 days. As you feed it, hopefully you'll notice that the starter doubles in size and has some nice bubbles in it. If you're not getting the results you want, you need to Google what could be going wrong. Sourdough is resilient, but also at times finicky. My previous starters had issues because my house was too cold during the Canadian winter, then it was too dry, then it wasn't working great because I didn't have a lid on it. I'll be posting a short video of all of my past starters just to show some issues you can have with them. By the end of the 7 days, your starter should be doubling in size, and it should have bubbles throughout. To test if your starter is ready to make bread, you can do the water test. This is where you drip some of your starter into a cup of water. If it floats, it's ready. If it sinks, you should feed it and try the test again in 12 hours. Feed your starter at 8 a.m., then leave it for 4 to 7 hours, since that's how long it could take your starter to activate and be ready. By noon, you can start the auto-lease part of the process. This is where you combine 5 to 6 cups of flour of your choice and 3.5 cups of water. The dough mixture should be somewhere in between a pizza dough and cake batter. If your dough is looking too wet, like mine did, don't be afraid to mix in more flour until you're happy with it. Or if it's too dry, add a little bit of water. I added 6 cups of whole wheat flour and 3.5 cups of water. This means the dough will be roughly 75% to 80% hydrated. The dough should be sticky to touch. Let the dough sit covered with a clean kitchen towel for 45 minutes. your starter should be doming at the top. If it started to deflate, that means it's running out of food. You want to add it to your dough before it runs out of food. The dough should be less sticky and more smoother at this point in the process. You'll want to add 1 cup of starter to the dough. Mix it well with your hands. Then add around 5 tablespoons of salt and mix that with your hands as well. Leave the dough with your towel on it for 30 minutes. A fun fact, if you use oil to cover your hands, the dough won't stick to them as much. After the 30 minutes is up, you can begin the stretch and fold process. This process will help the gluten and dough tighten up. Gently stretch the dough and fold it over itself, turning the bowl with every stretch and fold. You can do this roughly 4 times, and then leave it covered for 45 minutes. Repeat the whole stretch and fold process around 4 times. This would be a great time to watch a few episodes of The Walking Dead in between each round of stretching and folding. You should be able to watch 4 episodes. I recommend watching the finale of Season 4 and the first 3 episodes of Season 5. After the final 45 minutes is up, you can do a test called the window pane test. This is where you take a bit of the dough and stretch it in your fingers. It should be able to get very thin and almost see-through without tearing. Now it's time for the bulk rise. This can be tricky depending on the temperature in your house. It'll take anywhere between 2 to 6 hours. So it's a good idea to check your dough every hour to see how it's doing. It should get airy and feel fluffy. If it's late at night, you can put the dough in your fridge and let it bulk rise in the fridge. I left my dough in the fridge overnight and resumed the baking process in the morning. There should be a super nice jiggle to it and feel very smooth. Make sure you have flour on your work surface before removing your dough from the bowl. Cut the dough into half with a sharp knife. Unlike my knife was a little not good.
So this is just a quick little pre-shaping. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, boom. 1, 2, 1, 2, boom, boom, flip. So while those are bench resting,
Get a bowl or a pasta strainer and put a tea towel inside of it. You'll want to ensure it's covered with flour. Now you'll want to shape it a wee bit. You can fold it over itself and rotate the dough like it's a steering wheel. I'm not really sure how else to put it, but it's essentially that. I'm still very new to the world of bread making, so I've included footage of the pros at work to help illustrate what you should be doing. As you can see, his dough is much tighter and better looking than mine because he did a better job at shaping. Yeah. You can also dip your dough into sesame seeds or poppy seeds or a mixture of both. Once your dough is shaped, you can put them into your bowls. Make sure you put flour on top of the dough and cover it with a tea towel. You'll now be proofing your dough. You can proof them in the fridge overnight or leave it out for 2 or 3 hours. However, if you proof them in the fridge, you'll develop a better flavor and color. After your dough is done proofing, you'll be ready to bake. Using a Dutch oven would be the best way to go, but those can get expensive, and I'm merely a broke 20-something-year-old with very little baking and cooking experience, so we won't be using that. To mimic the Dutch oven, you'll want to use something like a baking stone or a pizza steel or cast iron pan. If you don't have that, use a casserole dish, and if you don't have that, use a tray, like I'm doing. The bottom crust won't turn out as good as it would if you use something that could hold the heat, but at least you're making bread. Begin the baking process by preheating your oven at 500 degrees with your tray inside of it for at least 45 minutes. When your oven is ready, make sure your dough is proofed. You can do this by poking it. It should bounce back from your poke while leaving a little dent. If it springs back all the way, it's underproofed. If it doesn't spring back, it's overproofed. Flip your dough onto parchment paper. Remove some excess flour from it. Use your sharpest knife and score it in the middle. Then you can put it in the oven. To mimic a Dutch oven, make sure you have another dish in the oven that you can fill up with ice cubes. The steam from the melting ice will help the bread rise. Bake your dough for 20 minutes at 500 degrees. Then turn down the temperature to 450 degrees and bake for another 20 minutes. You'll want your crust to look nice and brown by the end of it all. Once you're done, remove the bread. A good test to see if it's cooked proper is to carefully flip it over and knock on the bottom. It should sound hollow. Mine didn't sound so good because the bottom was undercooked due to the fact that I'm using a baking tray and it doesn't retain the heat as well as something like a baking stone or Dutch oven. Let the bread cool for an hour before cutting into it. You'll want to see air pockets in the bread. Although my bread had an undercooked bottom, it still tasted delicious. Your bread might not be the most gorgeous bread ever, but it's great knowing you can make edible bread with pretty much no equipment. Sourdough starters and making bread has a lot of variables that can affect it, but it's still a fun process. When you're done making the bread, you'll be able to store your starter in the fridge and feed it once a week, which makes it a lot easier to maintain, and it'll feel less frustrating every single day because you don't have to feed your starter twice a day. Thanks for watching, and I hope I helped a bit with your bread making journey. I'll see you next time. Bye!